started thinking about literacy on a deeper level.
I grew up seeing my great-grandmother keep her money in her house. That was not foreign to me. That was kind of the norm.
And this kind of next phase of digital divide conversations.
I don't want to call it tech illiteracy.
There has to be a hyper focus on training and upward mobility.
Moving out to Silicon Valley, I would be around these tech giants.
I need to solve problems in the most accessible way possible.
Versus going back home and people still standing in line at Kroger to cash a check.
Because you know that this is your only route to economic opportunity.
It was seeing people just handle money in a whole different way.
We obviously know the struggles of our parents.
Tell somebody like my dad, whether it's someone who is 60, honestly someone who is 20. One part of it sounds like cool, another part sounds like it's a scam.
You might eat oodles and noodles and get those Trader Joe's 19-cent bananas. You're gonna pay for some internet.
You're gonna have to.
There's so much more to money than saving it, spending it, and making it grow. So we're digging deeper and exploring all the topics we only scratched the surface on in our book to uncover how money really affects our lives. I'm Julian.
And I'm Kirsten, but most people know us as Rich and Regular. Maybe you've seen us on social media, read about us, or we popped up on your TV one day.
The Saunders are rewriting the rules to achieving financial freedom.
We're writers and creative entrepreneurs on a mission to inspire better conversations about money. Welcome to Cashing Out, the podcast.
If you spend a lot of time on social media, being online and the real world start to blend together. From finding jobs to how we buy things, finding love and communicating with people, today, it's all done online. The internet has become so deeply ingrained in society, you'd be justified to think everyone was online. But nothing could be further from the truth. There are plenty of places and people all around our country that simply aren't connected.
This is the digital divide, the difference between the haves and the have-nots, the online and the offline, the upwardly mobile and the left behind. If the internet was a book, some of us wouldn't know where to find it, how to read it, and most importantly, how it can improve their lives. So we called on two of the most technologically savvy people we know to learn more.
Meet Sheena Allen. She's a tech entrepreneur, speaker, and founder of Capway, a digital ecosystem that offers world-class tools and resources to help customers manage their money throughout their lives. Fun fact, she's also the youngest woman in America to own and operate a digital bank.
Next, meet Sherrell Dorsey. She's a data journalist, strategist, and entrepreneur focused on the intersection of technology and Black innovation. She's the founder of The Plug, a subscription news and insights platform, and author of the book, Upper Hand, The Future of Work for the Rest of Us.
I can't help but to think about the last time I saw you, which was at a financial conference. I think it was Orlando. I remember going to the gift shop to get some medicine, and there were two women in line in front of me that were getting ready to buy some things. And one woman was getting ready to pay using her phone, and the other woman saw her and started roasting her.
What?
Like, what are you doing? Like that, you look crazy. Or like,
bro, what are you talking about, man?
Like, you know how we do, like just roasting her. And I couldn't help but to think, like, I knew I wanted to have this conversation with you. But then here I was having a very real moment of, I don't want to call it tech illiteracy, but like discomfort. She was not accustomed to it. It was unusual to her. So I share that story because I'm curious as to how tech illiteracy shows up in your everyday life.
Yeah, and I'll talk about it in two sides. One, personal, professional, then pre and post pandemic, because the pandemic has played a huge role in it. Pre-pandemic, a lot of my family members still kept their money in their house. Cash was still king. Like, I want to see my money, touch my money. Like, I don't want to, just if I'm just being transparent for this podcast, I don't want the white man touching my money. Like, I need to be able to look at my money, touch my money. It's mine. I don't trust you. And so to tell somebody like my dad, whether it's someone who is 60, honestly, someone who is 20, where I'm from, to download this app and all your money is going to move through these digital transactions right there on your phone. One part of it sounds like cool. Another part sounds like it's a scam. Like, I'm not doing that. Yeah, not going to happen. And so you had this world pre-pandemic where that was the case. And now you fast forward post-pandemic, where those who did not trust to do things on their phone from a digital transaction perspective they were kind of forced into what we now are calling the cashless economy.
Somewhere in the near future, physical money will become like these, relics of a different age.
Mm-hmm. You couldn't walk to the bank branch. My grandmother, you couldn't pay her, Lord rest her soul. If she probably was alive after this pandemic, she probably would not have cared at all. She probably been like, I'm going to just not touch money and let somebody give me $1 until I can get back into, because she had those relationships. Our grandparents had those relationships with like the bank teller.
Yeah.
And I gotta talk to my girl Susie over here, and I'm not talking to nobody else.
Yeah.
That was my grandmother, and there's a lot of people from my personal experience in the South that were like that.
Yes.
So you pushing to a post-pandemic world where bank branches were closed down. You push to a world where a lot of bank branches closed down. Banking debt increased maybe 50, 60% in certain areas because those banks were closing down. The pandemic came and said, hey, we're not even going to open back up once we can't open back up. And so you had people who were forced into this digital world.
When I started to hear that term in research and policy environments, because I'm such a nerd, I just will go sit in lectures. And I started to hear that term and this idea of the digital divide. It really made me kind of rethink my childhood and the experience of my friends. I'm from Seattle, and Seattle being the tech environment that it is, I was exposed to engineers and software developers and got a chance to learn how to code in high school at a program where it was all Black and brown kids in the inner city. We're like in a storefront that they transformed into like this computer lab. And so for some of those folks too, first generation Americans, their parents did not speak English. They did not have the same level of investment, right? So these kinds of programs were so critical to their successes. And so when I look back on like some of my classmates who are directors and executives at various tech firms, again, I mean, this was very much poverty level kids. They used to give us bus passes to take the bus from school. And I mean, the bus was 75 cents, right? That was something that my mom, who's a single parent, could afford. But for many of these families who had 4 or 5 other kids to try to feed, right? Like that $1.50 round trip to go to a learning program that gave you money for college, as well as connected you with paid internship programs, and gave you an opportunity to get your homework done at that center before classes began. That was a lifeline. And so I had to take that concept of digital divide a lot more personally and really like have this sense of awareness of, oh, Sherrell, you were in a very privileged position, in which I never felt privileged, right? I kind of just felt like, all right, I'm not going to the top private school. I'm not going to where Bill Gates went to school, even though I begged and pleaded for my mom. And she's like, oh no, like that's college tuition right there. And so I never felt that sense of privilege until that digital divide language started coming down the pipeline, and you realize, oh wait, people really don't have or cannot afford internet access. They don't even have a laptop, let alone at the time desktops were like the biggest things. And that prevents them from excelling because they have to rely on public services and hoping that, your 45 minutes of Wi-Fi at the library before it cuts off is adequate enough time for you to do the research you need to complete your assignments.
The problem that I have seen, though, to answer your question directly, even in this post-pandemic world, is either one, they still don't have access to the proper internet access. I know that sounds so crazy to some people in 2022.
It doesn't. Which is why we, in part why we wanted to have this conversation. But go ahead.
It's trust me, when I'm in like California, New York, and especially talking to investors, even saying people don't have bank accounts, the same way I tell people now, the issue is with pandemic, kids couldn't do homework because they don't have computers or they don't have access to the internet to sign on to do their homework on a computer.
A study from Common Sense Media and the Boston Consulting Group looked at the extent of the digital divide among K-12 students in public schools. During the pandemic, it found 16 million students were living in the digital divide. The problem is most prevalent among Black, Latinx, and Native American students and rural communities.
Even when I was a broke college student. It was like, you know, you and your friends, your apartment, the one thing you will pay for, you may be eating oodles and noodles, right? You might eat oodles and noodles and get those Trader Joe's 19-cent bananas, right? To sustain yourself, right? Like, but hands down, you're going to pay for some internet.
Yo, you're going to have
because you know that this is your only route to economic opportunity.
As of summer 2022, over 42 million people in the US still don't have access to high-speed internet. As Sheena and Sherrell said, this made learning during the pandemic almost impossible. But the problem also affects adults. While your job may have given you a laptop to work from home, if you can't connect to the internet, it's almost impossible to get anything done.
Meanwhile, those who are connected casually move on, streaming, gaming, surfing, downloading, uploading, and participating in a multi-billion-dollar marketplace without any real understanding or acknowledgement of the people we've left behind. This is the divide at work. The Industrial Revolution left factories vacant and communities broken. And if we don't take action soon in this tech revolution, history will repeat itself.
What do you think is the biggest misperception or stereotype that people in general don't understand about the unbanked or the underbanked?
Externally, the biggest misconception is that people who are unbanked or underbanked is poor. When I used to speak of serving or targeting or helping a specific segment within Capway, focusing just on unbanked and underbanked, investors, people on the outside immediately equated that to poor people. And I would have to correct them. It's like there's somebody right now in Delta, Mississippi that's unbanked, does not have a bank account, either from trust issues, too far to go to a bank, and they got $50K sitting in their house. It has nothing to do with them being poor in any way. There's a lot of other reasons that they can be unbanked or underbanked that has zero to do with if they're poor. And I always throw examples out, like pop culture examples of, you know, we all seen Color Purple. You know, when Mr. goes out to the coop to get the money to steal his kids back.
Yeah.
Mr. unbanked, but Mr. had a whole bunch of money out there in that chicken coop, right? He's the reason those stealing kids got to come back to America.
Yeah.
You know, we've all seen the movie Soul Food.
I was just about to say, the Uncle and Soul Food. That was upstairs.
Yeah.
I left the towel on the stove. Oh my. Uncle Pete, you all right?
Y'all had all that money in the TV. He was unbanked. He wasn't
Big
poor.
mama knew.
So we have this thing from this traditional financial world or this elite world that when you speak of people who are unbanked or underbanked, they immediately think, oh, that's low income, that's poor. And that is actually not the case at all. Or some people who are unbanked or underbanked, low income and poor, sure. But there's people who got bank accounts who are going to overdraft who are low income and poor. So that is by far, I would say, the number one thing that I've experienced from personal and professional. That's a huge misconception.
Yeah. I want to go back to when you were saying that you kind of realized that what you had exposure to was a privilege and that you needed to take advantage of it. Because I had a similar epiphany when I started thinking about literacy on a deeper level. We obviously know the struggles of our parents and our ancestors, and that the right to read was taken away from them. But when you look at even different types of literacy, from financial literacy to tech literacy, there's a path to get literate. With financial literacy, we can kind of point people to institutions that have documented things. There's a breadth of resources online, and that industry hasn't really been disrupted a ton up until recently.
Yeah.
And that kind of blends into the world of tech literacy. And so my question for you is, with tech literacy and trying to get people caught up, is getting caught up even a worthy goal because of the pace of innovation? Like, is there a baseline or a standard that we should be following to say, when you can do these things, you're tech literate, and when you start falling behind, here's where you start to invest in your learning? How should we be thinking about tech literacy is basically my question.
That's such a great question, because I don't believe any of us is tech literate. Like, quite honestly, I feel like, you know, we adapt and evolved as the technology happens, but we're never going to know 100% because tech is changing rapidly.
Yeah.
And there obviously are some baselines and basics, right? But I think about like, we're in the in-between generation, right? We had majority of our childhood without vast access to a bunch of technology, right? I mean, like I definitely had my Game Boy, my Tamagotchi, you know, all of that. And then it was like, you're kind of hitting your tween into teen years. And now all of a sudden tech is significant, right? Like I had the Nokia phone and we were texting, right? And text used to be like 25 cents a minute. And my mom used to cuss me out every month because that bill would be insane because texting started to become really major. And then you have this next generation where technology to an extent is all they know, even if it's just through their smartphone, right? And so there's a layer of understanding how the apps work, right? And I don't know that understanding how apps work or how to make videos and things like that completely make you tech literate. It makes you product literate, right? But what do we talk about when we think about technology literacy? Because knowing and mastering products is very different from understanding the technology itself. And having machines in your household, having a television is technology, right? Having a refrigerator that will tell me when I need to change a filter, like that's technology in and of itself, right? It for us, I think that we have to redefine what tech literacy looks like, because for me, I think that the literacy around technology is really about what tools do I need to help solve the problems that I have on a daily basis.
Yes.
Because if I understand which tech tools exist that help me, help my family, help my community, then I'm literate about the world around me and what my options are.
That's another issue that we've seen post-pandemic. We're trying to move people into this whole digital transaction, cashless economy. It's like, I don't even have internet access, you know, here. We saw all the photos of kids going to sit outside of like Taco Bell and McDonald's, and certain school districts having to pay to put like Wi-Fi on these buses and pick up kids and let them sit on the bus for a while. That is real.
We don't appreciate just how much of a steep curve that this is for families.
Almost a year into the pandemic, frustration from parents and grandparents forced to take on an unprecedented role in schooling their own kids continues to mount.
We still are working with our parents and teaching them how to effectively use Zoom.
That's real.
We still have this digital divide issue where it's like, I can't even give you a digital app or a banking app because you don't have the proper internet access to even do the digital transaction on your phone. And of course, you know, to round that out, fraud in the digital world has increased so much. I believe the number said in 2021 and 2022, about 80 to 85% of all fraud was done through card not present, meaning somebody started an account through a digital platform and they're doing transactions under your name, under your social security. And that's scary for a lot of people. And so that has also become an issue with the fraud when it comes to doing this digital divide and understanding and trusting this new world of the way that money moves. So cashless economy, digital divide, the financial divide is still very real in 2022. And it will be for 2023. And honestly, I think for years to come.
I wrote Upper Hand for that grandmother in the church basement who's trying to navigate her city resources to ensure that her grandson can get access to tech. I tell people all the time, like, I didn't write this for people who are already in the bubble. We're in the bubble. There's so many other people outside of the bubble that we got to get into the bubble. And so if other people aren't going to use language like digital divide, they're going to say, oh, you know, my internet is off, right? Or, you know, I don't have my data planner. I got to go buy some more. Remember back in the day, it was go buy some more minutes for your phone. Right. And so it is not just like being able to scroll Instagram, which, yes, you should have the ability to do that as well. But it is also all of these other areas of our lives where I was even just thinking about how Black and brown folks were the most highly leveraged and invested in crypto. Right. It was easy. It was accessible. You have the app tools. We've got tools now like Cash App, all of these new technologies that are supposed to help create some democratization around like personal finance in some capacity. But then the downside of that, as these folks were starting to learn about investing and leveraging crypto, is all that they had. So as crypto started to diminish, you've got folks who bet the bank on an investment because it's almost was the equivalent of scratching lottery tickets, right? And now what little bit of wealth you were able to accumulate has now all but disappeared. And that significantly hurts people who, again, we're not going to have access to the other tools that exist when you do have that level of connectivity and resources and opportunity. A lot of times, like in the child welfare system, my mother used to manage the child welfare system for the state of Washington. And I remember sitting in on some of the discussions that she would host. And part of the challenge was, you're asking folks to, show up to various appointments. And if they don't, or they miss, or they're late, right? Because maybe they're on the bus was late, or they didn't have money for the bus. You create ongoing poverty cycles because you're making it almost impossible for people to meet the requirements in order to stabilize their families, right? Or in order to get access to the benefits that they need to continue to support their household while they get on their feet. And so imagine if the system transitions to more of a digital environment so that you can maybe speak with your caseworker online and you don't have to leave your home. You don't have to worry about trying to find childcare for your kids. So there's this upside of the investment in the technology. And I've worked with companies like Verizon, as well as like AT&T in the past to think through like, how do we expand that access, right? How do we expand the coverage? And how do policymakers and like local leaders start to really highlight like, that this is a challenge and an issue, and even within our schools. Like there's so many trickle-down environments where this has to reach, but then also we have to show people the connectivity towards the opportunity of using this to change their lives. And I'm not just talking about being a content creator, because we know that there's lots of money available there, but we also have to ensure that like the rest of our families are shored up for success as well.
I think that when it comes to the tech side, and even more specifically the FinTech side, the problem is a lot of FinTech organizations or the solutions that they have do not touch the root issue. It's very surface level. And so if I'm stepping back as a founder and from my personal professional, if I'm looking at root issues of even getting us even a step closer to where we need to be, I got a bucket of 20 things from a root perspective that's an issue. That is, getting people banked is number one. I guess even one example. The second thing is for this next generation who actually, for the most part, is doing decently well financially, but they're sandwiched in. So one part they're taking care of their mom and their dad or their grandparents, and then below them they're trying to be a good parent and take care of their kids to build generational wealth. It is, I don't know if anybody's seen, but we have these shirts that say generational wealth. And a lot of people are like, that's such like a cliche. And I'm like, it is a cliche, but I actually wear the shirts. And the reason I wanted to do those shirts was actually to spark a conversation, not around this whole like general conversation around like, yeah, we're getting generational wealth. It's like, no, let's talk about the true thing of like, especially as young Black people in America, doing our best, becoming entrepreneurs, luckily getting some form of funding, still way behind. We're still caught in this world where generational wealth is so far-fetched, not because we don't know it, we don't see it. It's because to obtain it, we are punching and breaking through so many things where it's like, I think I did a tweet about this. It went viral a few years ago. And I talked about so many of my friends who were making six figures for the first time. And it was like, I made it. But it's like, not really, because now I made six figures. Now mom is like, baby, can you help me pay my light bill?
Yeah, I'm ready to retire.
Yeah, I'm ready to retire off the 100K. And it's that ain't how that's 100K is not and I actually, my first time experiencing this was not being in Mississippi. It was when I got into tech and seeing like those young Black people who look like me finally making that move and going to Silicon Valley and being like, I'm making 150K, which of course we all know in San Francisco, that's not a lot of money. But in their world, it was like to make 150K coming from Alabama, Mississippi, even, North Carolina, that was huge. But then for your mom or your dad or your little brother or your cousin, Uncle Pookie to be like, oh, you in Silicon Valley working for a tech company making 150?
Yeah.
No, light bill due. Yeah. It's rough over here. So there's so many levels to even getting to the digital and tech divide that it's so many root issues. And I think the problem is, and why it's going to take those 50 years, is because until we address the problems to even get to that actual problem, we got a long way to go.
Financial literacy and tech literacy go hand in hand. Think about it. You probably can't watch this episode if you don't have good internet access or high-speed data. If you don't have a computer or a smartphone, you can't use any of the financial apps we may recommend or even download a resource that may be available to you. And by the time you figure that all out, the tech you have may be outdated or incompatible with the other tech that you need. When you think about it this way, the digital divide is about more than just access, literacy, and affordability. It's about survival, quality of life, and about who's being given a fair chance at upward mobility.
I want to talk a little bit about the book because it was such a great read, and I'm so glad that we had an opportunity to read it. And you share this story about how when the company went public and you had some shares, you didn't really kind of see the same level of return that many of your peers did. I'm wondering if you could bring us back to that moment and then offer some advice for what people who are having those kinds of negotiations now need to know so that they don't stumble over the same tripwire that you did.
Absolutely. And I will say, going back to that moment, I remember just being so excited to have a job. Moved to Charlotte, was sleeping on my aunt's sofa, had savings, but of course savings ends at some point. Mm-hmm. And I remember, getting the interview at Uber, really excited, number one, for the company, because when I had moved back home to Seattle, Uber had been launched on the West Coast. So it was about a 3-year time difference between when it actually got over to the East Coast. So I was like, oh yeah, for sure. Like, this is dope. I'm already familiar with the brand. I think I could really kill it here in this market. And so I was just so excited to have what I consider to be stable employment at this major tech company that was taking over the universe, and to be able to do it in Charlotte, which, coming from New York in the Northeast, my rent, I could put my rent together with some cans, Yeah. I could put my rent together with some cans. I was like, I'm going to have some change at the end of the month. So I was just excited about having some steady big girl employment, right? And to be able to have this name on my resume being back truly within the tech space, after having, my last tech company prior to that being Microsoft in high school. And so I didn't know nothing about nothing. I negotiated against myself, right? I didn't, I was just happy to be in the room. And I think part of that was just the trauma of the recession toppled with, I've never been offered shares of a company in my life, And so I was just happy to accept. And it wasn't a conversation that I even felt comfortable having directly with my family, because all of them had worked in either a government capacity or a nonprofit capacity or some big major corporation that, they'd been at for 20, 30 years. And so, and probably was me also being in my 20s and just feeling oh, of course, I'm just, just going to, I know what I'm doing kind of situation. But the vast majority of my peers were not working in these kinds of jobs at the time. Right. That came later as I started to build my relationships within tech. Right. Because now it's most of my friends are in tech. But at the time, I didn't have that peer network. Right. Folks were working as leasing managers at apartment complexes and, or still kind of working for general marketing agencies in New York. Right. That was not a communal conversation to be had. And there was not open dialogue around money. Money was just so weird. My mom gets so upset with me when I say this, but it's we did not talk about money, not from a comfortability standpoint. It was mostly you got money for that?
Paying the bills.
Yeah.
Right.
We don't have money for that, or we do have money for this.
Exactly. And so there wasn't a culture of conversation around money, what to expect, how to negotiate, or what do these shares mean when it is time to make a stock purchase, right? And, now them shares ain't looking so good based on this market, but, even the fact that you need to have some level of savings or wealth built up so that you can take advantage of those shares. Yes. Right. So that you can buy them when your blackout period closes or opens, once you've vested. And like even just vesting, and as much as I, try to pay attention in like the orientation, all of it was all foreign language. Mm-hmm. It was all foreign language. All I knew was white people be buying stocks, so I'm gonna buy me a couple. I'm gonna take my little $5 here, and I'm gonna try to own something.
Get me one.
This little piece, right?
Y'all better
I don't know what I'm doing. My mom always says, she was like, my mom used to always say, God takes care of babies and fools. And so I'm just a fool. I'm like, I got something, but wasn't everything that I could have gotten, right? Is my salary everything I could have gotten? And it's like, I kick myself when I think about the tens of thousands of dollars I've left on the table by not either negotiating for myself or asking for more.
What is Capway and what makes it special or what makes it different from some of the other fintech companies out there?
Yeah, so Capway, the name in itself stands for a new way of doing capital. The company came about because in running my first startup, I was seeing like just the vast difference of how money was handled where I was born and raised versus where I had now become in life. So a quick backstory of that, I'm born and raised in Terry, Mississippi. It's a little small country town out in central Mississippi, right on the outskirts of Jackson. So a lot of people will know Jackson, Mississippi, Jackson State University. Mm-hmm. Jackson actually has the highest population of unbanked and underbanked residents. So that means people who don't have bank accounts or they have bank accounts, but they're relying on alternative financial services, payday lending, check cashing, title loans. Mississippi is notorious for that. The South, honestly, is notorious for that. So that is, but if you talk about cities like Memphis and New Orleans and Baton Rouge, they're also notorious for that. And so I grew up, which I didn't know any difference then, but I grew up seeing my great grandmother keep her money in her house. That was not foreign to me. That was just kind of the norm. But so in fast forwarding, going off to college, starting my first tech company, moving out to Silicon Valley, where I eventually actually ended up building my first company out in Austin, Texas, it was seeing people just handle money in a whole different way. How they thought about money, how they treated money. I don't buy diapers for baby showers. I buy stock. I buy my friend like stocks for their children. It's just the way they thought about money was so interesting. And so when I would be around these like tech giants or these mentors and how they thought about money versus going back home and people still standing in line at Kroger to cash a check, very, very different. And so the original idea of Capway, once again, the name in itself stands for a new way of doing capital. That's what Capway means. The original idea was creating a digital bank for the unbanked, the underbanked. I wanted to take people who lived in like that Delta regional area, the Mississippis, the Arkansas, the Birminghams, and give them something that could put banking in their hand. Pre-pandemic, which is when Capway started, people still really didn't have a true answer to the banking deserts or the lack of financial access and opportunities, discriminations that historically has gone on. And so we end up doing Capway. Of course, fast forwarding a little bit, the pandemic happened. Capway came out. The idea of Capway started in 2017, 2018. By the time we launched, it was post-pandemic, and we had to make some changes because, of course, we all know the pandemic made some changes in all of our lives. Yeah. So where Capway is now and what makes us different, who we are as a company, is we went from originally saying we're going to be this mobile bank for unbanked, underbanked, to now being a fintech company, a financial technology company that says, how do we build an ecosystem of products and services for people who are two things. One, they're moving away from the traditional financial system into a new age, modern day financial system. And the second thing is, how do we build an ecosystem for people? When we say everyone, because how do we build an ecosystem where everyone has access to financial health and wealth, access to financial resources and opportunities? And the reason we say everyone is because you don't go everywhere and get started the same starting line as maybe someone who has more money than you, someone who comes from a different background than you. And that's something we want to solve at Capway. Wasn't right. Well, who we are now is not about just banking. We would love you to bank with us. That's great. Yeah. But it's not about banking for us. It's really about a lifetime of financial engagement and financial transactions. Yes. So it makes us very different in other fintechs. Is one, we don't focus just on banking. It's not a bank with cool features. It's an ecosystem of lifetime engagement, lifetime value. And the second thing, which makes us very different, which may not more so be from a consumer side, is we actually build a lot of our tech in-house. But why that is important to this question is because by building our own tech, we really control what and how we do, and the scale and the products that we're able to bring to you without being pigeonholed on somebody else's technology or limitations.
Yeah. Tech literacy extends far beyond the products you own, how to use them, access to, or the speed of your internet. Because when you understand the role tech plays in shaping our worlds, the better equipped you are to thrive in it. Think about it this way. There's a difference between simply being connected and being plugged in. When you're connected, you have the ability to buy, access to information, and a view of the game as it's being played. But when you're plugged in, you're an active participant in designing the future, so you can define the role you're playing it. Though there's a long, expensive, and complicated road ahead, we are making progress thanks to the work many are doing today.
We were talking to a DEI expert yesterday, and we kind of framed up this question. We were like, imagine it's 10 years from now, it's 2032 or 2034, whatever, and there's a headline on diversity in the New York Times or whatever publication. What would you like it to say? And her response was, I mean, I don't even think in terms of 10 years. I don't expect to see real change until 2050. And there was a part of me that related to that because we're in a similar boat where it's like there's nothing about building Black wealth outside of like a big public policy change that's going to be very quick. There's not a ton of quick wins. There's a lot of digging out and generational and time needed. And it made me think of you and your work with the plug. And so I wanted to ask, in your world, how do you stay motivated to continue to work on this long game, things where the rewards aren't, sometimes they're quick, but then they're reversed. sometimes it's just a little volatile. And what's next for the plug, given, the trajectory of how long we're looking?
Yeah, my goodness, there's so much there, right? I think about we have a lot of key dates, right? It's supposed to be that by 2040, minorities are no longer minorities. So there's kind of that end. I look a lot too. I think there was a big stat that was going around for a while on Black net worth by 2050 is supposed to reach zero. A lot of our wealth wiped out during the 2008 recession, and then kind of the further challenge of pandemic, and then we're looking at layoffs now. So very scary times for sure, right? And I think that we can't ignore that. But I do think that amid the tragedy and amid the challenges really provides a new set of opportunities and circumstances that allow us to be strategic. And that's also why I wrote Upper Hand, and I also wanted to share the reporting and research of what's happening across Black innovation, because if you're paying attention, there are some unique inflection points that are also happening that can help us to educate each other on not just wealth building, but career and purpose building at the same time. Because I think that in addition to preaching resource allocation and resource accumulation is important, I think there are also some other things that are shifting within our communities and our societies as it relates to emotional intelligence, strategy, as well as critical thinking. At least I hope that that's kind of what this exposure across social media is helping us to do as well, because we also have to think about the mental health implications of poverty and the challenges that exist, and even with wealth, right? As we've kind of seen and witnessed in the last few weeks. So for me, with the plug and in our documentation of trends and innovation and looking across even Black-led startups who were able to raise Series A and Series B rounds of funding within the venture capital space, which is very rare, unfortunately rare. Being able to map these things and also take a look at, for the first time, probably in the history of this country, we are seeing more Black asset managers managing funds of $100 million plus, literally for the first time in human history, or our history, and probably human history, considering how long we've been Black on this planet. But I think that those sort of signals to me are the things that I try to pay attention to, right? Because yes, wide sweeping policy change has to happen, the student loan crisis, all of these kinds of things. We do a lot of reporting on HBCUs and innovation. I also look towards that as well. Whereas, listen, I think there was a lot of fodder around celebrities being the saviors of HBCUs, when the reality is, like, they have been historically underfunded for centuries. Yes. And the reality is that, like, yes, policy change needs to happen, but there also has to be corporate investment. And we're seeing that with, like, Apple and the Propel Center, which will be housed in Atlanta and be an environment for Black software engineers and developers to train under Apple and get more access to jobs and opportunities. So I think that leveling the playing field is really at the hands of these corporate companies who in 2020 made significant pledges towards helping Black communities onboard into tech jobs and tech roles. I would hope too, we're strategically thinking about how we also onboard into some of these credentialing programs. I know that between Amazon and Google and Verizon and all these places, that yes, they may face some layoffs, but that just means they're ready for the next round of things that they're developing. And so being in those rooms and learning under those particular companies, and again, if you're paying attention and you're setting up a strategy and you're looking at the opportunities, again, tech literacy, not just being what you're learning in terms of how to program or what have you, but the actual breadth of opportunities that exist that you can do from home on your schedule in order to credential yourself for what's coming in the new economy, because 2023 is going to look very different, right? Oh, yeah. 2024, 2025, once we get to 2050, for me, I don't actually care about the race conversation. What I actually care about is, did we do enough strategically to make sure that people understood what their options were?
I know it's a big issue, right? The digital divide, tech illiteracy. It's something that I've been mindful of for about 20 years now. Do you have, or is there a set of proposals that you think are probably best at trying to address these issues? Because I've read far more articles talking about the pervasiveness of the issue, but not nearly as many like solutions or proposed solutions. So like, do you have one, or is the one that you are mindful of that you think is best suited to kind of solve for the issues that we've been talking about?
At Capway, personally, and of course using Capway is my vessel to do this. Do we have answers? Yes. The problem is that when it comes, it's two problems, if I'm just being honest here. One is, anytime you're doing anything in finance and technology, it takes funding to do that. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, people who have the ideas, people who've experienced these things, they are least likely to get the funding. So that's number one. So that's the issue. The second issue that comes along with having the answer, having the solution, is that even still kind of speaking to funding, it's a sexy idea. It's a sexy thought, or to speak of it sounds sexy to solve it, but to actually solve it is at the top of no one's list when you're talking about the reality of what's going on. It's public, so it's not like a secret. If you look up grants that have been given to AT&T, Verizon, billions of dollars have been given to them to figure out the digital divide issue. AT is in Dallas. They've been given millions, billions of government contracts to lay fiber, figure out this digital divide issue. And this was before the pandemic. And we see that it's still there. So are solutions there? Do I have solutions? There are things we want to work on? Yes. But these are also, unfortunately, these are not $1 million fixes. These are $100 million fixes. These are infrastructure fixes. These are structural fixes. These are government fixes. And when you don't have those things willingly to work together behind closed doors, not what looks good in social media, or like for a politician to get elected. Until it makes sense for everybody behind closed doors, there's never going to be a solution. And I don't like being like the person like bearer of bad news, but like, no, that's reality. We're never going to get to the solution until everybody behind closed doors is on the same page. And I don't see that happening anytime soon.
One quick thing from a book standpoint, I loved Blackbuck and I'm not sure if you all have read it. The author, Matteo, his last name is blanking on me. It is an incredible book. I picked up at the airport, and it is the story of this young man. He works at Starbucks, completely unrealized and tapped potential, ends up joining this tech startup from a sales perspective. It's a crazy environment, right? It kind of reminds me like my early days working for other startups, but the Black experience version. And like this thing has to become a movie. Anyway, he like stealthily creates this entire network of underserved, underrepresented, misfits, where he essentially trains all of them to get these like lucrative sales jobs at these tech companies. And all of these like companies start to catch on that like there's too many Black and brown people in these companies. Like, how is this happening? But it was so brilliant because it was like, if we work in stealth strategic operation and ensure that the information we're disseminating over the next decade, over the next 2 decades, helps people define how to build wealth, how to build a strategy, which majors to choose, which industries to go into, how to buy property and work together. Like,
and don't get distracted.
And don't get distracted because I don't care about whether or not we're like 2050, whether you had a pledge or not, I don't care, because guess what? My entire community had the resources they need in the school systems that they were in because we were so strategic with our planning. We didn't have to stand on stages and yell and scream and protest, right? And that made it, again, I'm sure most organizers and folks who are policy advocates would disagree with me, but that's not the conversation I want to have because it's been unproductive for so long. I'd rather us be in the room saying, okay, now that we've accumulated these wealth on a per household basis, we've made great decisions. We've been able to stabilize our families. We've been able to tap into therapy and have healthy relationships and reduced our divorce rates or reduced our single parent households into 2-parent households. Like, those are the actual things that help to guarantee stronger outcomes. And so if we focus on those right areas, I feel like the conversation will shift in its entirety. And on top of that, by 2050, we'll have seen more Black-led companies either IPO'd or been sold for $500 million to a couple $2 billion. And then when we're talking about creating and working in our own institutions and our own companies, well, it's not going to be a flex to work for a Google, right? Or an Amazon. It's going to be a flex to work for like a Resilia or a Calendly, right? Yes. Or a Capway.
Come on now.
For me, I'm like, we talk about 3008, like there are Black people in the future. So let's
3008.
let's reshift the conversation, right?
I completely agree, because if you can focus on the parts that you control, right? The decisions, the individual decisions and forks in the roads that we make. If you can look at historically where our money has been lost, where there was a wealth transfer, where we've put too many eggs in one basket, you can really start to mitigate against it. And then what you have is a strong base that can move policy forward at a much stronger rate. It's not to say that grassroots organizing and protesting doesn't work or isn't effective. It's just like, imagine how much more effective it could be if it were well funded by people who also benefit from those activities. So yeah, I'm right there with you. That's the perfect answer and the perfect way to end. I just want to like drop the mic and like cut. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Cashing Out the Podcast. To see more videos like this, subscribe to our YouTube channel and be sure to turn on your notifications. To get your copy of Cashing Out the book, visit Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore, or download the audiobook on Audible.